I'm gonna let you go.
So we're unmuted, all good to go? Okie dokie. All right, everyone, we'll start the next session. Hopefully you can hear me all right. I'm Dr. Lauren Woolbright. I'm a lecturer of games production and director of the Games Research Lab at Flinders University here in Adelaide. So happy to see some of my students in the audience here. So we're going to take an analog turn. We have 2 presentations on tabletop role-playing games and 1 about board games in this panel. So just to introduce the speakers real quick, I'll introduce all of them here at the beginning so I don't get in the way in between sessions, and we'll just flow right through. Our first one is remote, and that one is exploring the use of tabletop gaming for wellness by Alyssia Merrick, who is a PhD candidate at James Cook University with support from Dr. Dan J. Miller and Dr. Amanda Krause, also of James Cook University. The second presentation will be by Ruby Edwards and Martin Gibbs, Lucy Sparrow of University of Melbourne, and that one is called Commensality as Conceptual Framework for TTRPG Research. And lastly, we will have Melissa Rogerson and Sasha Soraine of the University of Melbourne as well, playing with players on the criticality of critical play. So we'll kick off with the video first, and then we'll head into the live presentations. And I'll be in the Discord.
Hello everyone, my name is Alyssia Merrick and I'm presenting to you today regarding the preliminary findings on our exploration of the current use of tabletop gaming for wellness promotion in Australia. This research is being conducted from James Cook University in collaboration with Dr. Dan J. Miller and Dr. Amanda Krause. Before we dive into our research, I want to highlight some of the background that motivated this current research. For the honors year of my psychology degree, I conducted, in collaboration with Dr. Dan J. Miller, a single-arm trial of the game Dungeons & Dragons on Townsville community members to provide an examination on if this engagement with play impacted their mental health and self-concepts. After 8 weeks of engagement with Dungeons & Dragons, we found a reduction in depression, anxiety, and stress scores, and an improvement in self-reported self-esteem and self-efficacy. These results were exciting and reflect results that Corso and Quinlan received when they interviewed Dungeons & Dragons players recovering from mental illness. Their interview results indicated that by engaging in this play, the participants found an improvement in their own wellness. It was after engaging with this research that we became curious of the perspectives that practitioners have regarding implementing tabletop role-playing games for wellness. Further literature searches located research conducted by Gutierrez, who investigated the therapeutic use of tabletop role-playing games in the USA by interviewing mental health practitioners that were working with adolescents in this manner. While their results reflected positively on the impact that this format of play has had on clients, the author reflected that they had struggled to locate participants due to the limited number of practitioners available to them, leading us to the design of this current study. The intent of this current research is to collect data regarding the current use of tabletop games as a modality to encourage improvements in wellness in Australia. In order to do this, we are performing semi-structured interviews with Australian game masters who are running their games in a professional manner for wellness promotion. Noting Gutierrez's struggle to acquire participants, we have broadened our participant group to not just mental health practitioners working with adolescents, but to all Australian game masters aged 18 plus who are running games to promote wellness. In order to ensure that there was a common understanding of wellness among practitioners, we provided them with the following definition. Wellness is defined as a holistic integration of physical, mental, and spiritual well-being, with well-being being defined as a positive state experienced by individuals and societies. For data analysis, we are utilizing reflexive thematic analysis, which is an inductive thematic analysis. This is completed over 6 steps. At the time of this recording, 15 interviews have been conducted, 13 of which have been transcribed. Of the 15 participants involved, 2 are employed in the education sector, 4 are game masters for wellness via community organizations, and the remaining 9 belong to careers in healthcare. With regards to the writing of the final report, we are hoping to begin this in late March to early April. Now I'd like to discuss our current themes, and I've included some key participant quotes for you to read in your own time. One of the themes is intervention, highlighting the tool or modality that the practitioner uses for wellness promotion. Within this theme, there are 5 sub-themes. The first is game system, which demonstrated the use of both the Dungeons & Dragons role-playing system and a specifically designed system named Critical Core, which is an adaptation of Dungeons & Dragons. Next is game parameters, which is used to catalog codes focusing on the benefits of the tool, such as its customizability or its accessibility. Game pragmatics encapsulates information about how the intervention has been manipulated within this wellness setting, including the use of mentally healthy clients to act as role models. The theme of considerations highlights statements in which the interviewees have highlighted their concerns and recommendations from their implementation. And the theme of barriers focuses on the issues that practitioners have identified that have impeded them from implementing this intervention. Some considerations include the practitioner's confidence with the intervention style and the balance between therapy and play, whereas barriers include client hesitance towards the intervention style, the lack of empirical evidence, and client disabilities or needs. The second theme revolves around the practitioner, the person that is running the intervention itself. The first sub-theme focuses on the current experience that the practitioner has at the time of their interview. This encapsulates details of both their training with the intervention being implemented, such as learning to be a game master, their experience with the intervention external to their implementation, such as if they play Dungeons & Dragons for fun, and their training with mental health resources. Next, the sub-theme training details information such as the availability of training for the intervention, whether that be company-led or online, and the desire for more formalized training. Finally, interviewees detailed information about what an ideal practitioner would look like to run this intervention, which led to the final sub-theme. This could include being open-minded, being organized, and being trained with mental health resources. Our third theme highlights details about the client, our term for the people actively participating in the intervention implemented. Practitioners detailed that participants came from a variety of different mental health backgrounds, leading to the sub-theme of mental health. Mental health diagnoses included mood, behavioral, personality, and executive functioning concerns. The next sub-theme examines the gender and sexuality of the clients, which was briefly detailed by practitioners. Finally, client age is the sub-theme which highlights a wide range of audience. The final sub-theme is wellness outcomes that are reported from the intervention. This includes information that clients, practitioners, and/or external parties have reported. There are 3 primary sub-themes that have been identified from participant interviews: clients' connection with others, their connection with self, and life skills. Within the sub-theme of connection with others, statements highlight improved socialization and social skills, the promotion of cooperation and collaboration, friendship development among clients, improved understanding not only of attachment but also of others, and the connection that clients' caregivers are achieving whilst the client is participating in the intervention. Practitioners have discussed that clients are re-engaging with the classroom, creating outings with their friends, and becoming more relaxed in social situations that would previously cause them stress. Connection with self summarizes the benefits that directly relate to the participant's self. This includes statements regarding increased client motivation, client creative expression, the client's expression via their character, and the agency or initiative that the intervention has provided them with. Practitioners have expressed that by taking on a different persona, clients are provided with a safe space to push boundaries and explore facets of themselves that they might otherwise be uncomfortable to do, therefore potentially facilitating growth. The final sub-theme is life skills, which describes the building of skills in participants which are applicable to their day-to-day. Concepts within this sub-theme include improved understanding of consequence, building frustration tolerance, patience development, resilience building, practice with problem solving, assistance with learning disabilities, and trauma processing. In tabletop games, players need to engage with each other to solve problems, and also exercise restraint to allow others to actively participate in the game. Furthermore, dice are frequently used as a tool to measure character success, and thus character achievement can be quite unpredictable, leading to potential frustration. What do we take away from these findings? Well, the first thing we can identify is that there is a large potential client base as described by the interviewees. It appears that clients of all ages and of a large variety of mental health diagnoses should be able to benefit from this style of intervention. Furthermore, clients in which talk therapy might not be appropriate could benefit from this alternative to typical therapy. The practitioners that were interviewed were also eager to continue not only their own training on this intervention, but encourage others to give this style of intervention a chance for their clients. Mixed reports were given as to access and quality of training available, which demonstrates demand for the development of more thoroughly designed training. Finally, practitioners have reported a large variety of benefits that they have observed in clients during the course of their implemented intervention. This could be suggestive of the ability to tailor this style of intervention to target certain wellness improvements dependent on the client engaged. So where do we go from here? Our main priority is to complete the data analysis of this research and then get this paper published in an open access journal. The next focus in our research is then conducting a randomized control trial to further assess the impacts that playing Dungeons & Dragons can have on wellness. We're hoping to assess this with both quantitative and qualitative tools to provide a comprehensive analysis. If you or someone you know utilizes tabletop gaming for wellness, then we would like to extend an invitation to you to participate in this current research. You can do this by either following the link displayed on this slide or by utilizing the QR code. Finally, my email address is also here if you desire to reach out to me regarding this research. Thank you so much for engaging with this research, and we look forward to seeing the future of tabletop gaming in this wellness space.
Yeah, let's, where's Hyde?
I'm trying to get off this roll.
Sorry, Bill.
Yeah.
So, hi, everyone, and thank you for coming to listen to this presentation on Commensality as a conceptual framework for TTRPG research. So, I totally forgot that I had to do the PowerPoint. There we go. So from understandings of social dynamics during D&D sessions to design implications for couch co-op games, I believe that Commensality has the potential to provide really fresh insights into gaming practices that we might not consider otherwise. So the puzzle for me in my research lately has been why my players or my participants consistently brought up player engagement and distraction, as well as the social aspect of D&D. At first, this sounded like quite a simple question for me, but then I started to wonder if I was taking something for granted. So as a little bit of background, commensality is a term that started off in anthropology, particularly in the studies of food and eating practices, so as well as kinship and the home. But it basically boils down to people eating together. So Mary Douglas and Jonathan Krause are two kind of prominent researchers who talked about food as producing and being produced by social relations and meanings. And there are lots of other studies about this as well, about the significance of sharing food, passing plates, sitting at a physical table or like place settings, having conversations over a meal, the symbolism of particular foods, who's producing the foods, that kind of thing. But, and I know you're probably thinking, what does this have to do with games? But I'm going to get there. So one way that researchers have kind of applied this framework slightly differently is in thinking about how digital technology has impacted food and eating. So the graphic here is from a really cool study where participants ate a meal by themselves in their rooms while video calling with a stranger who was also eating by themselves in their rooms. And the result was a really playful kind of interaction where they were pretending to eat emoji food and applying really weird filters. And it was a really cool demonstration of how tech can be used playfully. So how does this apply to games and TTRPG research? Although commensality is traditionally concerned with food and eating, it also encompasses a lot of other social practices as well, like sharing physical space, embodied interactions like passing plates, community formation and reinforcement, and constructions of normative behaviour and expectations. So if we view games through a commensal lens, thinking of the game as the meal that's being shared, I think we can talk about some aspects of play that we might overlook otherwise that are more kind of like socially grounded. So in another study that I wanted to highlight, because this is kind of what got me interested in like commensality as it relates to TTRPG specifically, researchers asked 6 families to video record 2 shared meal times and then analyze the footage, and their insights were kind of weirdly relevant to a D&D context. They identified a number of rules and conventions that these families negotiated and set out themselves that govern tech usage at the table. So effectively, what happened was that any tech that was shared was generally considered acceptable and a part of the overall experience, while personal use of devices, anything that took the individual out of that shared experience, was a source of real tension and generally restricted. And these rules and conventions were really similar to the ways that participants talked about device use in D&D games. So in my research so far, players and dungeon masters valued player engagement really, really highly. They considered a high level of engagement pretty much the mark of a successful session, but they also thought of distractions as a barrier to a successful session, but as completely inevitable. One of them called it the perennial issue. And this normally revolved around phones and laptop use, flicking onto different websites, that kind of stuff. And building rules and conventions about how they use technology during play is the main way that they tried to manage these distractions. Some banned phone use from the table altogether, which wasn't always successful. So others just limited phone use to like just game-related tasks, so only looking up spell lists, that kind of thing, which again kind of had moderate success generally. But on the other hand, anything that was kind of like a shared experience, like digital character sheets, like maps, music, virtual tabletops, those kind of things were really widely welcomed and kind of considered like part of the experience. So again, it was anything that contributed to the communal experience was kind of considered like good, basically. I kind of just wanted to highlight a group I've been playing with for the last few weeks as a participant observer, which has been really cool. They've established their own really individual practices for achieving a social and narratively fulfilling game experience. So they run a voice-only game on Discord, which is quite unusual as far as D&D games go. And they've set up a server, so if anyone misses like a role-playing queue, they can come back and do it over text. And that becomes canon. So this screenshot here is basically one of the other characters interacting with me because he'd gone off to get a snack. Like at the time that interaction actually happened. So yeah, it's really, really cool. Sorry, I've lost my place, hang on. Yeah, so this group accepts that distraction is inevitable, particularly online, and has chosen to work around it rather than try to prevent it. And the social aspect of D&D is really on display here. Often the distractions come from an out-of-character chat that's happening simultaneously, and they're often talking about something that just happened in the game. So yeah, they embrace the idea that out-of-character social space is just as important as the role play. This is the way they set up their server, which I find really, really cool. You can see that the social channels are kind of muddled in with the role-playing game channels in there. And the players will often add something from the role-play chat while also sending a GIF or a meme about a game development literally at the same time. So for them, the boundaries between the social and the gameplay are really blurred. And Commensality has been quite a fun tool to talk about how and why this happens. Okay, I'm not sure how long I've been going for, but
You're good. I'm watching the time.
Emily, good, good. So in conclusion, Commensality can give us real insights into how communal play functions, the meanings behind the social components of games, like how the non-game practices interact with the overall games experience, and how groups shape unique practices and conventions to impact their game experience. I also kind of had a thought about how it could impact like game studies slightly more broadly as well, like through helping us consider things like design implications, how games can take physical space and sharing of things between players into account, or how we can design like communal video game play, like couch co-op or LAN parties, to kind of take those like physical social experiences into account. But yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for listening.
All right, we're going to swap over to our last presenters who are front and center here. Plenty of stuff.
Okay, we're good. Hi, everybody. You are welcome to share photos, comments, whatever, about our talk on socials. And to name check is fine too. Yeah. So, hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Rogerson. I'm a DiGRA Research Fellow at the University of Melbourne. And our project broadly, or the project broadly, is looking at hybrid play in the sense of board games that are also technology artifacts. So they have a technology component. And that's why I was having a little rant earlier. I said there was a rant coming on. Board games are not necessarily analog. Tabletop games in general are not necessarily analog. And I think particularly Ruby's talk, you know, highlighted that there's a lot of digital practices that surround this kind of play. So, you know, we talk about board games or tabletop games rather than analog games. Sorry, introducing myself and ranting at the same time, can't resist.
Hi, and I'm Dr. Sasha Soraine. I'm Melissa's postdoc, working with her on this DiGRA project. And like she said, we're really focusing right now on hybrid games, hybrid play practices. And what we're coming to talk to you about today is one kind of branch of this research that looks at critical play groups around hybrid games.
Thank you. So when we think about games research, I think over the last few years, we've got much better at introducing game companies, game designers, game developers as part of the conversation. And what we really want to argue for, and it's kind of our manifesto, if you like, of our research, is that as well as thinking about games as being designed and built by people, we also need to recognise that games are played by players and that players have unique insights into the experience of playing a game, of using a game, may interpret the game in particular ways that the designers hadn't necessarily foreseen. And I guess it kind of comes down to almost a manifesto that, you know, if we're going to talk about board games or hybrid games, we also need to talk to the people who are playing them and create opportunities for people to engage with these games and play these games. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today.
That's all right. So as we kind of put towards our work, this manifesto of really making sure we're including local gaming communities, local players in all of the different aspects of our research, we put together something that we call a critical play reference group. So basically, this is a monthly session where we invite members of our local board gaming communities and tabletop gaming communities, mostly board games here, who are hobbyists or involved with lots of gameplay, to come in, play some games of interest. So right now we have our focus on hybrid games. We have a library of currently over 65 hybrid games and kind of growing with it. And we ask them to come in, self-organize into groups, pick out a game that they would like to try for that evening, play it, fill out a little survey on Qualtrics, and then participate in some semi-structured group interviews about what they thought about the games, how they played it, how they understood what was going on in it, etc. So we are just wanting to present a couple of our initial findings and insights into this, as well as then give you some advice onto how in your own research you could establish a critical play reference group of your own. So when people play games and when we then ask them in their interviews, what do they think? The first thing that really comes up in their talks and in their discussion is what is the value of the technology in the game that they just played. So here we have two examples that kind of sit on opposite spectrums. The first being a game called Picture Perfect, where people are asked to set up a little tableau of characters in a scene as if they're going to take a picture at a family event. These characters have secret objectives, so that way there are different constraints on how you would have to place them. And at the end of the game, people actually take out their phone, take a picture of their tableau, and score based on that to see what the camera saw. However, when players were discussing that game, they often felt like the technology wasn't really important. So even though we would classify it as hybrid, it has this digital component of using your phone to interact with it, players themselves didn't really perceive it as such. And that came up a lot. In contrast, there are games like Yummy Yummy Monster Tummy here, where there's an app integrated with the game, and players are looking to feed monsters by scanning little color cards to try to mix a color together and feed the monster a color it wants. In that case, the game does a lot of behind the scenes work, and players were really, really invested in feeling like the game itself was fully integrated with the app, and the technology was very, very important. So that kind of experience was something that was really apparent at first, but we didn't have enough data to see kind of where these spectrums lie. And from those discussions, it kind of continued on into the philosophical question of what is a hybrid game. And the first thing that comes up is, well, what is a hybrid? What are these boundaries between a board game that doesn't need these kind of components and what that does? And one thing that we found is that this is not just a question of the value and integration of technology, but also kind of what the players perceive to be the technology's role at the table. So on one side of this spectrum, it's things like Picture Perfect, where and Danger Danger, which use a function that already exists on players' phones or devices, where they felt like it's really less hybrid. In comparison, you have things like Yummy Yummy Monster Tummy, or a different game, Beasts of Balance, where players are stacking animals up onto a little Bluetooth scale and projecting it onto an app, where they felt like it was really, really heavily involved in the process. And in that way, they felt more like they were actually doing hybrid play, even though both would be hybrid-like.
So in a way, those are the kinds of results that we expected to be getting from the Critical Play Reference Group, right? We invited people to come in and talk to us about the hybrid games as they played them. But what we also found was there was lots of other kind of supporting discussion that went on. So things like, what is the nature of a game? What makes a game a game? So, you know, Sasha talked about Beasts of Balance, and they felt that that was an experience where the technology was really tightly coupled with the play. But they also didn't really feel it was a game. You know, they were just stacking animals on a plinth. They were like, it was a lovely, lovely activity, but was it really a game? Although some people felt that it was quite strategic, the way that they stacked the animals, obviously trying to get the next player's animals to, you know, knock down the pile, but there were these interesting kind of discussions that went on about what are we actually doing here? What makes a game a game? And as part of those discussions, we also engaged with the hybrid digital board game model that Lucy and I actually worked on a few years ago, where we looked at what functions is the technology bringing into this game. One of the things that we did very early on was we introduced this to the players, and we said, this is one of the ways that we are conceptualizing these games. And this was really interesting to us with the people that keep, you know, coming back month after month. They've kind of learned about our model, and they've learned how to apply it, and in some cases have been critical of it, but have also then been able to really sort of make a valuable contribution, not just to kind of what does the play of this game look like, but also to thinking about practical applications of how the model goes. So there's this kind of learning and almost investment. You know, we'll hear them explaining the model to other people as well, as they go through, you know, and attend other events. So they've really kind of picked up on things by participating in this group as well. And I just want to be clear, I'm not saying, oh, they're very knowledgeable now because they have learned about our model. I'm saying they're really helpful to us because they're doing some of that work almost for us along the way.
So with that kind of in mind, we want to summarize this in terms of what we learned and why we think approaching research in this way is good, and what the pros of running this critical play reference group have been. So firstly, all of those kind of major discussions and things that have been brought up that we've been finding really show us that our players value technology, which is strongly embedded into the gameplay itself, things that they feel like are complementing or working together with the actual gameplay and mechanics of the systems. And that often that looks like things like bespoke apps, things that are developed specifically uniquely for a game that exists. As well as we saw in our comments earlier, that there are these diverse expectations and understandings of what technology can do and what it should do in the games. And all of this is stuff that may seem apparent and may seem like things that maybe we as researchers would have gone, well, that seems reasonable, but it's interesting to hear it come from players, especially things like understanding what matters to them. Those questions of what are the boundaries of a game, or what are the boundaries of hybridity, are things that sometimes we as researchers, when we hear what's a game, we all go, oh my gosh, I know. We've had this conversation back in 2007. No one cares anymore. We're moving on. But it does matter to our players. And that's something that we never set out to ask them, and they just constantly keep bringing up. And as well, the pros of having this recurring group who become knowledgeable hobbyists, and we can draw on their game literacy against each other, get deeper insights, and help them articulate their ideas. In spite of all of that, obviously, we have some kind of limitations. As people get more familiar with the model, you get into questions about, are they fixating too much on games they've already played, or elements like, are they choosing different games, or are they going back to the same ones? Oftentimes, what we find is that people prefer to explore novel experiences. They prefer to play new games in our growing library. And because of that, one of the things we want to run into is figuring out how to encourage them to target different games or replay games to get deeper insights. So just to kind of wrap everything up for all of us, we really think that this critical play reference group approach has allowed us to study player experiences in a very deep, insightful, and particularly contextual way. And we really think that other people should also approach game research in a similar way. If you are going to be running your own critical play reference group, firstly, be really clear about your goals and focus. That's why our library is exclusively hybrid games. Whatever you are looking at yourself, make sure that you have very targeted games you're asking people to play. As well, please make sure that you are recruiting from your local community and potentially ongoingly. Otherwise, you start to run the risk of things we're seeing, like ideas that are kind of bouncing off each other in a little bit of an echo chamber, and people developing similar responses because of their interactions with other members of the group. And encouraging targeted gameplay through rotating out your options. One of the things we find is that we put out everything and people tend to get overwhelmed. Having kind of dedicated days or dedicated sessions where you're looking at just something specific. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to us talk a little bit about our current approach. If you'd like to reach out to us, our emails are at the bottom, but if you have any questions, we'd also love to field them in Q&A.
And if you're in Melbourne and you'd like to join the Critical Play Reference Group, please reach out to us as well. Thanks.
So we're going to move into our Q&A. Thank you so much. Ruby, do you want to come back up? Lovely. Does anyone in the panel need a chair? I'd be happy to grab chairs. So before I forget, I'd like to kick off Q&A if that's all right, and then we'll see what's going on in Zoom. So for Melissa and Sasha, I've definitely found that when you're introducing new games to people, they're generally a little bit reticent to try them out, and it takes a little bit of time to learn the rules, and sometimes they sort of opt out of play if they possibly can. So it's really interesting to me to hear how open your group is to playing lots of things. Do you think that's because of the audience that you've attracted? Yeah, I mean, I'll pass you this one if you want.
Yeah. Do you mind if I field this one?
Please.
Yeah, so we have found very similar things, and actually one of the limitations we've run into is that because these monthly sessions run usually on a weekday after work, people are really, really hesitant to get some of the bigger games, or even ones that are campaign games that will take multiple sessions to get through. What we have found is not an unwillingness to learn them as much as it is participants seemed a little reticent to start them because they weren't sure if they were expected to complete the whole game in one setting. And so we did have to do a little bit of recalibration on expectations for the participants and let them know it is okay to try things out. It's okay if they even don't get through the game or play it wrong. Those are also experiences we want to hear about in these interviews, because that's part of the process at a regular table, is people might be playing a game wrong for the first 2 times and needs to fix it later.
One other thing is, because we've set up a group, and we didn't talk about this, but we have Slack where they can kind of coordinate things between sessions. They will sometimes say, hey, I want to play this game next time. Who else wants to play this? And take on roles. So we had one guy say, I want to play Return to Dark Tower. I'm going to learn the rules, but here's a video. I want people to, commit to wanting to play and commit to watching this video before the session. And that meant that for a game that can be quite fiddly to get started, actually they all arrived, went straight off into a little conference room and got started straight away because, one person had taken that role of rules teacher, but everybody had watched a how to play video, so they all had a sense of how it was going to go. And so we see this kind of self-organising within the group as well, which is really cool and sort of addresses, I think, in part that problem.
That's great, thank you. Will you all hang on to that one, and I'll use this one to pass around the room if it's going to be. There we go. Okay. Anyone in the room? Yes. I see you.
Thank you. It's a question for the Commensality room. Thank you for that presentation. Even the new concept and work are very, very inspiring. Was wondering, in relation to the physical space, was there any insight in regarding, for example, the difference between playing at home versus a public space and that kind of context?
Yeah.
it's interesting. I had one group from my first study of interviews who played at a library, and that didn't really, the thing that they kind of looked for was like a circular table so they could all orient themselves in, even if it was a rectangular table, like just so they could be kind of like vaguely circular. And that made a really big difference. There was one session where they had to play over like 2 small circular tables, and that came up a lot where they were like, it was awful, we hated it. I think the biggest difference that I noticed between different spaces was the difference between online and in person, though, as you kind of expect. But it was interesting just the way that people kind of try to mimic the features of a physical space in a virtual one. That was something that came up a lot, where they would like position cameras in a particular way so it felt like people were looking down at a battle map, and then they would all still be rolling dice and that kind of thing. But that's something I want to focus on in the future, is how, you know, like even dice placement and like where you roll the dice and how you're passing like minis around, how that maybe kind of comes into things as well. Yeah, I hope that answered your question. I feel like I talked around it a bit, but I saw hands over here.
I've got a question for Ruby again. I've studied anthropology recently, and it's just really cool to see commensality as like being applied to like a variety of different things. I just wanted to ask your thoughts on commensality and the idea of like the shared narratives in TTRPGs. Like, did you see that as something that like kind of like functions in the way that commensality applies to like food, that kind of shared experience?
Yeah. So that's kind of the shared narrative and like the shared game experience. I kind of looked at commensality as a way to really center those social processes, rather than like, there's so much amazing research on D&D, but a lot of it does focus on how does it feel to put yourself in character, you know, like how do we build like social worlds that are fantasy worlds and that imagine world kind of space. But I found commensality quite helpful for being like, this is how these kind of like little social interactions happen at the table, and how they build a narrative and how they build practices that then lead to a narrative as well. So like the Discord group that I was talking about, their approach to distraction, the social, has now built this incredible like narrative archive, basically, where they have like years of gameplay, of actual role play that's been written out in a really kind of like novel format. Yeah, so I think when it comes to the narrative, there's a lot that we can do with commensality. Yeah.
One more from the room and one more online.
Cool. This one's for Melissa and Sasha, and I'm gonna have to find out about your reference group in Melbourne, because that sounds really cool. I saw you've got drop mix in your pile of things there, which is awesome, but almost unplayable nowadays because, yeah, so I want to know, like, the challenges of a hybrid games is you've got all the challenges of digital stuff, which got talked about in the first series, and the challenges of the tabletop stuff. How do you find that? Like,
so there's a couple different limitations. The first, so one is that what we're referencing here is there are a lot of different hybrid games that are no longer supported, the apps or the technology that exists. And what ends up happening is a lot of players in those communities can either no longer play those games or have to find alternate ways. One of the things we need as a reference group for our particular research is that we make sure every game is playable. We pretty much had to go through a catalog which ones were no longer working, figure out how to get them working, provide the technology, do all of that. I've sideloaded so many apps and just like gone in and automatically push things, or like we're rebuilding other apps to make sure that they work and function. It is not something that is always accessible to people. And so in a lot of ways, our reference group functions like a game library and a game museum to games that no longer exist. Or what's the one, The Case of Sherlock, which is now like
Yeah, we've got one called The Mysterious Case of Holmes, which is now only playable in German through a WhatsApp server. So that's kind of, we've got plenty of German speakers in our group. We probably could actually run a session with it, but we haven't yet. But we have games, so they're not all modern games, right? Some of our games are about 115 years old. And they don't work at the moment. We're actually just starting conversations with some conservators about what we can do, whether we replicate them. So we have this really kind of interesting thing. I also recently bought the Deal or No Deal board game because we're not only buying good games, right? We're buying
Because all games have experiences we need to catalog, not just like people are saying, the good ones.
So the Deal or No Deal board game, just so you know, you have to pay for the app to be able to play it. It's like $3 a month or something. We also bought the Disney Princess digital game night game, which is 5 physical games and 5 PowerPoint games that you play through PowerPoint. But according to the reviews on the Big W website, which is a very professional research source, even when you buy PowerPoint, the games still don't work.
But to kind of just like wrap up on that, yeah, this has been both an effort in conservatorship and rebuilding things, as well as a limitation or element in creating a technology library, a hardware library on top of the software, because a lot of times our participants will come in and you can't rely on them having the material to run games. For example, we have the Kickstarted Tabletop system. I don't know if people are aware of that. It is kind of a gaming platform where it has like an RFID hybrid board and app and digital dice, or not hybrid dice that you roll and your computer can see what you've rolled on it. And unless you have a phone from effectively this year, you can't run the games that it ships with. And so we have to provide that as well in order to do that. And so it's kind of a crash course for us on the sheer startup costs and the startup time in doing something like this.
And one final point, this has been a challenge for our budget because we had a budget to buy games, which we kind of overspent. But then we had to go out and buy technology, you know, buy tablets, buy phones that would definitely play these games, that we could install the apps on and make sure that they work. I'm looking at some games that are played on vinyl records is the next thing that I you know, there's 3 that I've got my eye on, but that means we need to buy a record player as well. It doesn't have to be a great record player. And the VCR games like Atmosphere or Nightmare, and I'm probably the only person in the room just about that remembers these, but the How to Host a Murder games that were popular in like the 80s and early 90s, which used audio cassettes. So we start to actually need to have technology that will let us play those cassettes and the VCRs and the vinyl records as well.
All right, so it's a little bit crickets online as far as last time I checked. But earlier during Alyssia and Ruby's presentation in particular, there was discussion about failure and creating space for productive or safe failures. So I was wondering, and all of you could speak to this because there's failure in all of the games that you're dealing with, whether you've encountered major issues with that and how you framed it for players so that it's less of a problem.
I'm actually not, like, D&D's a hard one with failure because the main failures that you get are the breakdowns in like the structures or the text that they're using. So like one of the biggest complaints that I had in people trying to kind of particularly integrate like a social aspect with an online game was that like the technology didn't work. Yeah, that kind of came into it a little bit, but aside from that, I'm not really sure how to approach that, to be honest. I'll have to think about it, but I'll pass it on.
I would echo you, Ruby, that the most frustrating kind of failure is the technology failure. It's not, I tried to do something and I didn't do it right, or I didn't do it well enough. Yeah, my dice failed me, or we've been running a study with a game where it's quite frequent for people to lose like what 2/3, 3/4 of the time. and people don't seem to mind that, but what they mind is when they're partway through a game and the technology crashes, or the technology does something unexpected, or maybe the technology hides what's going on too sometimes.
I'll actually just kind of roll off of that, because the other thing we noticed that we touched on a little in our presentation but didn't get time to really dive into is the expectations people have of technology that we find coming out of this critical play reference group. That as our participants become more involved with hybrid games and their literacy in it grows and they become more articulate with things like our model, we start to see a differentiation between when failure of the technology or failure of the game is seen as interesting or intrinsic. So sometimes, for example, in Yummy Yummy Monster Tummy, when scanning their cards, it will calculate for them how close the percentage of their colors they added were to what the game wanted it to be. And at one point it came up with not a number. And instead of being frustrated like they would have been with something like Saint Noir, where Alexa is not working, the entire discussion was on how interesting that was and what's going on behind the scenes and how is it actually calculating this. And so in a weird way, there's this hard divide between when the game is engaging enough that the technology functioning is a puzzle to our reference group players, and they're feeling like they are learning something about the mechanics through the weird failures of the app, versus when it really is a breakdown that is inhibiting their ability to engage with the gameplay, like when Alexa can't pick up people's accents and so doesn't know what it's supposed to be doing in an audio game.
There are more questions in the room. One in front and then.
This is just this is just a question on like feedback to the developers of these hybrid games. Do you give any to them? And if so, like how is it received?
So we're actually just about to start a round of interviews with them. They're quite interested. I was in Paris last year and somebody said, oh, I was talking to you, about that you were visiting with so-and-so and he really wants to talk to you. So there's interest in talking to us, but at the same time, I think there is a little bit of suspicion that we might end up showing up and kind of trying to tell them what to do. I think they've had bad experiences in the past, but that's certainly something that we're wanting to do as part of another branch of our project. Sasha's developed a sort of hybrid tool for one published game, and one of the things we want to do is reach out to that publisher and say, hey, we thought you might think this is cool. And I think that's a likely response that we will get from a lot of them, but I don't think that they're going to be very happy if we just show up and go, oh, we'd like to tell you what's wrong with your app, which honestly is kind of what we would probably want to tell them. So.
Yeah, they don't know what everyone else has said.
Thanks. Andrew Noe at City University. Great presentations from everybody. I've actually got one for the online speaker, Alyssia. Thanks also for Ruby for introducing me to the word commensality. That's great. So Alyssia, she talked about a theme associated with trauma processing with life skills for tabletop gaming. I'll maybe expand more on exactly what kinds of things were found there. That's basically.
Hello, sorry, I'm here. Hopefully you can all hear me. So regarding trauma processing, if I got the question right, there was a very brief discussion into trauma processing, but basically being able to, we had two different participants mention it. One mentioned that they were wanting to design their own sort of module for Dungeons and Dragons that really delved into trauma processing and the ways in which this can be sort of expressed throughout sessions. And then a second person sort of mentioned by engaging with trauma via a fantasy setting, or sort of treating the trauma as almost the big bad evil guy, we're able to sort of help the clients sort of combat it in more of a, I guess, quantitative manner. So instead of sort of talking about their feelings, they can punch their feelings, which some people have found really beneficial.
All right, well, it's technically lunchtime, but we'll take it. We'll take the last one. What we got? So, right, well, that's just me. So they can answer.
Oh,
that.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
You don't need to take my question. We can follow, so anyone who wants to ask further things for any session, I think you can just keep adding to those Discord channels, but for now, I'm happy to. Sure, go for it.
For anyone who's interested, Melissa and I did bring Yummy Yummy Monster Tummy to the conference. So if anyone does want to give it a try, either later today or after the conference on one of the other days, hit us up.
Yep, so I want to remind everyone to head upstairs if you get a chance and take a look at all of our experimental stream projects because they're really cool. And are there any other announcements that we need to make about lunch? We don't have any, so you have to go find it on your own. Sorry.
You can ask us.
Yeah, we'll give you suggestions for where to go and make sure you don't wander too far. All right, thanks everyone.